Good morning. My name is Mimi, and this is a Dash of Colors. If you're a consistent listener, welcome to the Morning Tea with Mimi. And if you are just listening for the first time, welcome to our safe zone, and I'm happy to have you listening. Today, let's talk about setting boundaries. If you're a person, one of the most important things that you have to realize is that you cannot possibly please everybody, and you cannot constantly keep yourself in a position where you compromise your standards just to please everybody around. People will not understand why you choose to do the things that you do, but the most important thing is that you are doing those things for yourself. And that is where boundaries come in place. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are clear distinctions or lines on how you relate with every other person. These are clear lines that people who come to your life see and understand as what you cherish and what you don't cherish. But the problem with boundaries is that, the problem people have with boundaries is that it is always very uncomfortable. People still want to call you past 7 p.m. People still want to text you the way they like. People still want to do stuff the way that makes you very uncomfortable. And in this case, when you begin to set boundaries, they always have a negative reaction to it because they expect you to do things that are more considerably favorable to them than they are to you. And we find cases of people neglecting other people's boundaries in workplaces, in families, among friends, and even in relationships. And while this has become a very common thing for everybody to just shove their asses into our lives when they want, it is very important for us to start building and establishing what boundaries are for us. Boundaries are, this is not what I want right now, and I don't owe you an apology for not wanting it. Boundaries are, this is what I want to be happy, and I don't really care if you find it very appealing or not. What matters is that this makes me really happy. I've had people come at me and then they say things like, why do you want to do this? You're too mean, you're too stern, you're too this and that. And then I know that there were times in my life where things like that never mattered. I just went with the wind. And what I had were people who disrespected me and disrespected my choices because it felt like I was an open wind and everyone had access to my life. And now that I have created boundaries around things that I like and things that are very uncomfortable for me, people who come to my life are really not going to embrace it just right away. And I understand that's perfect. And you have to understand that that's perfect as well. And that's the very uncomfortable thing about boundaries. But you're not supposed to change your boundaries because it makes someone else uncomfortable or it makes people around you talk. You only maintain your boundaries because that is what is good for you. In fact, the more people complain about your boundaries, the more healthier they are for your mental health. So it is very important as humans that you understand that you do things for yourself and not for every other person. If there are things in your life that you feel like people have always poked their noses into, maybe it's because you haven't created the right boundaries around them. And this is the same thing that happens in workplaces where people think they have to be friends with you because you work in the same place. I don't believe in being friends with colleagues. I believe that we're just colleagues, so we just have to work together in the office and that's all. And people really don't understand the boundary, and that's why most of them can text you on Saturdays or even every other day that you really have to rest. And that's very unfair, and I find that people are constantly violating our personal boundaries, and that's because they don't even exist at all. So you know the kind of life that you want, you know the kind of things that take or rock your boat, you know the kind of things that you really want to have. And it's very important that you establish that and make it very clear to everybody. Personally, I've always complained about people calling me on social media without asking me first. And when I say this, it seems like I'm a little bit too stern or mean or rude, but you can't just call me out of the blues without asking me if it's convenient to speak first. I feel like that's what Costa is, and I know that I would never do that to someone else. So I don't understand why people do not understand that it's boundary for me to say no to that particular thing. And yeah, I really am not apologetic anymore. And I want you to stop being apologetic to people for having boundaries, for deciding that these things are not things for you, for deciding that these are the things that you deserve, for deciding that you want this to be the kind of way that people look at your life. It's very important that people know that once it's 7 p.m. they don't call your phone. It's very important that people know that there are things you shouldn't do around you. There's nothing wrong with having boundaries. It's very healthy and it's very good for you. So if you find yourself in situations where you feel like people are constantly in your neck or trying to pull you down or trying to do things that are becoming very overwhelming for you, I just want you to know that the right thing to do is to start setting boundaries around those things and communicate your boundaries. It is very important to talk about it. Don't just assume that everybody is going to understand it, and don't explain yourself as well. You're just like trying to say that this is what it is for me, and it's left for the person to process it however they want to process it. It is not your responsibility to make anyone understand your boundaries. It is only your responsibility to communicate what it is, and whoever it is has to respect or feel hurt over it. At the end of the day, what matters is you and what makes you really happy. So I hope today that you learned that having boundaries are healthy, both in your workplace, in families, in relationships, and everywhere you find yourself. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with deciding that this is more appealing or something is not appealing to you at all. It all comes down to yourself and what you prefer the most. Thank you for listening, guys. And if you haven't subscribed to the Telegram community, I left the link in the description of this episode because I want to say good morning to you every other day. So do not forget to click on that link and join the Telegram community wherever you're listening to this. Thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple, wherever you're listening to this. Do not forget to subscribe and to give me a follow. I am definitely very grateful for the support. This is Mimi. This is a dash of colors. See you next time.